Voltron is back. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're talking about some Commander Legends cards, and in particular, Boros and Voltron. Commander Legends has some incredible Voltron and Boros cards in it, and I am really excited to talk about them, so that's what we're going to be doing today. Note that I will not be covering every red card or every white card in this video for the sake of brevity, mostly just things that pertain to Boros and mostly Voltron strategies. But if you guys like this video, let me know in the comments below, and I may end up doing a set review for white cards and red cards separately, so let me know if that's something you want to see. But anyway, let's get into the main topic. So today we're talking about Voltron. Voltron is a strategy that seems to take a lot of hate from people around the internet, even though if you build it right, it's really good. So what I think is interesting is that if you look back on Commander 8 to 10 years ago, Voltron decks were some of the strongest decks in the format at that time. Decks like Rafik and Ural and Zur, those were some of the top decks back then, and those were fairly salt-inducing commanders at the time. A lot of things have changed since then, and there's a lot more things to be doing, but if you wanted to take one of those old-school boogeymen of the format commanders and update it with all of today's stuff, it's still going to be a really powerful deck. And a lot of people still talk about Voltron like, the second someone resolves a single Fleshbag Marauder, the game is over for you. That's not the case. It's often as simple as like, play a Stoneforge Mystic, get the equipment you want, and then cast your commander, and then feed your Stoneforge Mystic to the Fleshbag Marauder. It's not like a terribly difficult problem to solve, and there's so many more protection effects than there ever used to be that there's a lot of ways to protect your commander. Sure, there's always some things that are going to be a problem. No one wants to get rifted. Toxic Deluge can be an issue sometimes. But it's important to remember that every strategy is weak to something, but that doesn't mean you just stop playing the game once you see that something. So anyway, I just wanted to give a little bit of historical context there. Commander Legends is going to bring Voltron back in a big way. There are so many great Voltron cards in this set. It is really exciting to see. So with that, let's get into the cards. The first one, and I think the one that was most exciting for me personally, was Arden Intrepid Archaeologist. And also for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to read through every card word by word. I'll talk about their abilities a little bit, but at the beginning of combat on your turn, you get to free equip an aura or an equipment to target permanent or player, and it partners. That is really, really cool. There's a lot of things I like about this. Obviously, I love free equips, and that's a huge deal for people that like to play equipment like myself. But the other thing, and this is a thing that I really like about Commander Legends, is that it also works for auras, because me being the equipment player, I do tend to forget about our friends, the Aura Voltron players. In the past, you had decks like Ural, but Aura Voltron is a really cool archetype that you don't see as much, but it is really cool that they're starting to support it now, especially in these colors. I know we had the Bant deck a few years ago. Anyway, thinking about things to do with this commander, some frontrunners for Arden are going to be Colossus Hammer, and I think this is finally going to make Argentum Armor playable. Even in my Aurelia Weapons of War deck, Argentum Armor is still so big and clunky, even with all the free equips, that it's just so difficult to get into play. I think Arden may actually be able to support Argentum Armor in a deck, because this is a free equip in your command zone, and that's a pretty big deal. So I'm super excited about trying to be able to actually use Argentum Armor in a deck, in particular, my Aurelia deck. But anyway, yeah, Arden is super exciting to me and one that I can't wait to check out, so let's move on. Next up, we have Wylith, Soul of Steel. Trample, and whenever it attacks, draw a card for each aura and equipment attached to it. Yeah, just load it up with aura and equipment, swing away, and draw a bunch of cards. Gonna be really cool. Couple things to note about this card. One, it's in the Precon deck, not actually in the booster packs for this set. I did have some trouble finding the image for this card because of that, so just keep that in mind that this one won't be in the boosters. You'll have to buy this one separately. But I think the main question with this is, do you run this, or do you run a Akiri if you want the card draw in your command zone? Personally, I'm probably still Team Akiri, just because that indestructible effect really does add a lot of utility with Akiri. But don't let that stop you, because loading this thing up with auras and equipments is going to be really cool. And once again, we see support for Aura Voltron, so if that's something you want to do, this is definitely going to be a good card for it. Next up, we have Rayav Master Smith. This is one that I'm super excited about. So maybe a year and a half ago, I was really trying to push Boros CEDH before Winota was printed. Winota makes it a lot easier. Gerard also makes it a lot easier. I was trying to do it with Akiri and Bruce and do it Voltron style. One of the things that I noticed is there wasn't a legendary 2-mana creature that had double strike. Your choices were basically go Akiri for having the 2-mana creature, or go Sylvia if you wanted double strike but at 3 mana. Obviously putting your Swords of Fire and Ice, Feast and Famine, War and Peace, Sinew and Steel on this thing, Mask of Memory, all gonna be pretty good, not too hard to see that. But what this commander opens up is this really glass cannon strategy that I've been thinking about for a while. If you're in win at all costs mode, a thing that you can do with this commander is drop your commander on 2, and then put a Destructive Urge on it on turn 3, attack someone, and then watch them sacrifice 2 lands. In all likelihood, that will probably make them ineffective for the rest of the game, and depending on the situation, they may just scoop if you pop their 2 lands. So it's a super dirty thing that you can do that I've been really excited to try out on unsuspecting players. Note, you shouldn't do this everywhere. The people you do this to should be playing annoyingly strong decks to begin with. If someone wants to bring out their Urza deck or their Lord Windgrace deck, this seems like a place to do that. So keep that in mind. Don't do that to everyone. But it is something I'm really excited to check out. Spectre Shroud is another one that kind of lives in that vein, not nearly as powerful as popping the lands, but you can rip their hand apart, and that's not nothing. And if you really want to get spiky with this, you start running all the fast mana like Chrome Mox, Mana Crypt, and so on. And you're potentially talking about doing this on turn 2 instead of on turn 3, and a lot of decks won't be able to recover from that, so that's got me really excited, in addition to the fact that you can just run this in the 99 of any Voltron deck, and it's going to be a pretty good time. Next up is Belborka, Spectral Sergeant, and I think it speaks to how spoiled we've been as Boros players this year that I'm not super excited about this card. It's decent, but it doesn't blow me away, but let's take a look at it. So note the converted mana cost of each card as it's put into exile. Its power is equal to the greatest number noted for it this turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So the design is interesting. This is another Boros commander with built-in card advantage. You get Impulse style draw with this, which is pretty cool. I'm not sure how to feel about the fact that its power is going to be all over the place. That does make general combat math planning kind of difficult. Like when you look at Aurelia, if you add +3/+3 and double strike to Aurelia, that gives you 22 commander damage, and that's a thing that you can plan for. You can't really plan for how big Belborka is going to be on any given turn a lot of the time, so just something to note there. Ultimately, as a commander, this doesn't get me terribly excited, doesn't mean I won't try it. But I think more than anything, this is probably going to be a bruiser that just goes into some Boros or Voltron deck, where it does 2 things. It's going to get you some extra cards, which is awesome, and periodically it's going to have a lot of power, and you're going to turn it sideways and get some damage in. Which is all very reasonable out of a 4-mana creature, and the 5 toughness does mean that it can block pretty well through the early and mid parts of the game, so at the very least it should be keeping your life total high. But I think the thing that's a little disappointing about this card is that there's no keywords on it. I think even a single keyword makes this card a lot better. Trample is the obvious one, but I would even settle for something like First Strike or Lifelink would have been kind of cool. Lifelink certainly would have been interesting because you talk about all the different things that are available to life gain strategies, so I think that would have been a really cool way to take this card. Not that it's terribly difficult to put Lifelink on it, but I think a single keyword on this card really makes it a lot more interesting. Or, because this is a partner set, if they put partner on it, that would have been pretty cool. So again, I think it speaks to how spoiled we've gotten this year getting awesome Boros cards, that I'm not as excited as you think I might be about this one. But we should also talk about some different ways that we can exile stuff. Here's a couple easy ways to get some exile going. And obviously there's many ways to exile stuff in white, so that'll be an interesting thing to play around with to see what is the best way to exile stuff and get its power pumped up the way you want it to. But I think the thing that it really does suffer from is missing trample. But on the other hand, it's not terribly difficult to give it trample or get protection from colors from a sword. Just to make sure you're getting that damage in. Some sort of evasion on this would have been nice. But so for me, mainly, I'll probably be trying this in the 99 more than I'll be trying it out of the command zone. That's just my general vibe from this card right now. Next up, we have another really interesting one that I'm very excited about, is Ketis Emberclaw Familiar. Whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent and partner. I'm honestly surprised that this effect hasn't existed in Red before. And the fact that this is out of your command zone now is a really big deal. The big question for me with this one is, who do you partner this with? Some of my frontrunners right now are Yeska, Akiri, or Arden, but I think it's going to take a lot of playtesting to figure out exactly who the best partner combinations are in the command zone. But this is one that certainly has my attention. Before Arden was spoiled, I was thinking just initially going with Akiri because it's easy to get like 5-6 power on Akiri very early into a game. And, you slam down Ketis, which is also 2 mana, which is awesome. So, if you're hitting each opponent for 5, that's such a big deal. Obviously, commander damage only goes to the main opponent that you're hitting. The damage to the other 2 players is not commander damage because it's not combat damage. But all the things you like with Saskia also apply here, which means that damage doubling is going to be really good with Ketis. But anyway, yeah, I'm super excited to start trying to figure out where Ketis fits into the picture exactly. Does it go in the command zone? Do you just put it in the 99? But that's the big question for me right now. Is it going in the command zone, or is it going in the 99 and we just take it when we get it? But I am really excited about seeing what it can do. Next up, we have a card that I absolutely love, and I think a lot of people are really excited about this card. That's Rograk, Son of Roga. I'm sure I didn't say that right. But it is a 0-cost commander, and that is super cool. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things to do with this commander. Obviously, there's a lot of Voltron potential there because of the keywords on it. First Strike Menace Trample is no joke. The only thing you need to worry about is getting power onto your commander, which isn't a terribly difficult thing to do, just play a lot of equipment. But I think there's also a lot of combo potential with Rograk, in the form of things like Cloudstone Curio, Mana Echoes, Ignite Memory, and trying to do some bounce loops where you just keep casting it over and over again. I think that's really interesting as well. Potentially you could do some hybrid stuff where it's a little bit Voltron, but you've also got this combo in the back pocket if you need it. Or you can potentially go all in on the combo. A lot of cool things that I think we're going to be seeing with this commander. But as far as like Boros Voltron versions of it are concerned, I think Arden is really interesting because now you're not paying for one of your commanders, and now you're not paying for your equip costs. That's a lot of cost cheating right there, and that has me really excited. So that's a pair that I'm really interested to try out. Will it be the best pair? I don't know. But it's definitely got my attention, and I'm really excited to build around it. Next up, we have another commander that looks really cool as well. This is Yeska, Thrice Reborn. Enters with a number of loyalty counters for the number of times you've cast it from the command zone. And the relevant text here is, choose target creature. Until your next turn, if that creature would deal combat damage to one of your opponents, it deals triple that damage instead. That is a huge damage spike. And by the way, of course, it does have partner. Thinking about this thing, when I first saw this, my initial thought was, who are we pairing this with? For me, I think initially Akiri Lineslinger was the front runner because, again, you can get 4, 5, 6 power on Akiri very quickly, and then you just drop this in, and now you're doing like near commander lethal on like turn 4 probably. That is really cool. Now, I'm a little concerned about Yeska that it's not going to be the easiest thing to keep alive, especially at 1 loyalty. It doesn't have a plus mode on it, but it is reasonably cheap to recast. It may be a situation where you don't cast it until you know you're going for the big hit, and that seems like it would make sense, so you don't just cast it all willy-nilly on turn 3. You cast it when you're set up and ready to go in for that big attack that you know is going to take someone out. But I think there's also a lot of room to play around with some of the other partner commanders that we're getting as well. Again, adding to that puzzle of exactly who's going to fit where, I think Yeska at least belongs in the 99 of a Voltron deck. Definitely a card worth checking out. Triple damage is a really big deal. If you get 7 power and unblockable or evasion on Akiri, that's lethal on a player. So that is a crazy damage spike right there. But anyway, yeah, Yeska, another really good Voltron card, gives some really cool options. Can probably eliminate people at CEDH speed, like turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, depending on your fast mana situation. So super excited about that. Next up, just worth mentioning, we do have these really pretty reprints of Akiri Lineslinger and Bruce Tarl. Obviously 2 cards that have been around for a while, but if you're just looking to make your Akiri and Bruce a little bit prettier, this is a way to do it. So next we get into the non-legendary cards, of which there's a bunch worth talking about as well. The first one we see is Commander's Plate, an equipment that's pretty exciting, and we don't get exciting equipment all the time anymore. It says equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity. So this is kind of cool because it rewards you for having less colors. It's going to be pretty good for monocolor decks and 2-color decks. As you start getting up to like 3, 4, and 5, I think it's going to lose value. But protection is a really strong mechanic. For those that don't remember, protection from a color does 4 things. It says you can't be targeted by spells of that color. All damage that will be dealt to the protected target from that color is reduced to 0. It can't have enchantments or auras of the protected color, and any that are on there will fall off. And finally, it can't be blocked by creatures of the protected color. So that's 4 things that it does, making it a really strong mechanic. I think this card's going to live in a similar space as Champion's Helm, which is another really cool protection card. Hopefully it stays a little bit cheaper than Champion's Helm, because those have gotten pretty expensive over the years. But I definitely see this in a deck like Feather. Feather loves protection, and it's even better when you don't have to hold that mana up every single turn like you would if you're trying to use spells to protect Feather. So Champion's Helm is an excellent card in that deck. I think Commander's Plate slots right into a Feather deck really nicely. Also, +3/+3 is no joke. That vastly changes the size of any creature that you put this on. And it's going to be tough to block for a lot of your opponents. It's going to be harder for them to remove it. It's just going to do a lot of nice things. So I think this is a really cool equipment that's worth checking out. I don't think it's going to go in every single deck ever, but it's certainly not a bad choice if you put it in. One thing to think about, though, that I am slightly disappointed in, but I get it, is one of the things that I like to do is play all of the pro red swords, then just run like a million red-based board wipes. This won't help you with that, because if your commander is red, obviously it won't protect you from red, but it may protect you from someone else trying to do that if you're not playing red. That's a small nitpick, but that is a thing that I like to do, so I'm a little bit disappointed that it doesn't get to do that. Next up, we have Wheel of Misfortune. A non-reserve list Wheel of Fortune. Kind of. This one's actually worth reading, because it's a little bit tricky. So, 3 mana, each player secretly chooses a number 0 or greater. Then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number. Each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand and draws 7 cards. So, the easiest way to think about it is, the player that chooses the highest number takes a bunch of damage. The player that chooses the lowest number does not get to wheel. The other 3 players do. That is a really interesting take on Wheel of Fortune. If you're asking me if it's good, I think it's good. I really need to test this one out. That's a lot of text that's kind of hard to evaluate in a vacuum. So I'm really excited to test this thing. It's obviously not better than Wheel of Fortune if you have a Wheel of Fortune. The question is really, is it a viable substitution to Wheel of Fortune if you don't have one? Or I guess the question is, would you run this over Reforge the Soul if you're not just running both of them? I think that's an interesting comparison to make. More so than the other wheels, I think it'll depend a lot more on game situation. So if you're still at a nice healthy 40 life, you can pay 10 life and make sure that you get the wheel. But if your life total is starting to dwindle a bit, you may not be able to do that. So it's interesting, it's tricky. There is certainly some world in which it could backfire on you. You know, if you picked 4 and everyone else is 5, 6, and 7, that's not a great place to be. But at least it's still only 3 mana, so you didn't lose a ton. I guess it's also a little bit interesting too, in that if someone wants to keep their hand, you just choose 0. Because oftentimes a wheel around turn 4 or turn 5 is really disruptive to what people are doing. Or if they fired a Demonic Tutor and are waiting to untap to cast the thing, they may not want a wheel. So there's going to be a lot of interplay between your opponents here. It's going to be a very interactive take on a Wheel of Fortune, and we'll see how that goes. You know, I've played black decks where I've paid 10 life to draw 5 cards, and if you're playing a red deck where it's generally a little bit harder to draw than it is in black, then sure, throw 10 life at it. Now, the thing that you really want, you're going to want some lifelink to gain some life back if you are planning to do that, or you're going to want to win the game very quickly. But yeah, it's a really interesting take on Wheel of Fortune. I think it's going to be pretty good. I think it's going to be very playable. But there are some situations where if your life total's getting low, then it may not be the best for you. So we'll see what happens. Can't wait to test this one out. Next up, we have Armored Sky Hunter. This is a cool card. So both myself and Tomer both read this wrong the first time we looked at it, which was early in the morning, 2 minutes after waking up. It's a 3/3 flying. Whenever it attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put an aura or equipment from among them onto the battlefield. If an equipment is put onto the battlefield this way, you may attach it to a creature you control. Put the rest of those cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Yeah. This is more free equips, and this is digging equipment out of your deck. And the thing that Tomer and I both got wrong is that we both read it and thought it was an ETB. It is not. It is on attack. So if you're playing Boros and you've got extra combats in your repertoire, this card looks really good. This thing was basically born for Aurelius, so I'm super excited to try this. Again, this is another thing that can grab Argentum armor. You won't get the attack trigger the first time, but it still gets +6/+6, and if you're attacking a second time, then obviously you get the Argentum armor trigger. But the other place that this is going to be valuable too, I think, is going to be in mono-white Voltron decks that have a really high equipment count, things like Balin, things like Shram, where you're not going to get the extra combats necessarily, but the deck is probably full of enough stuff that I would say that you're going to hit a card every 2 triggers or so. Sure, you might whiff on 1, but if you can trigger this thing twice, you should find something. But it also means that cards like Scroll Rack, which is getting reprinted in this set, do have a little bit more value here because you can put the equipment on top of your library just to make sure you hit one and replace it with some other cards. So top deck manipulation can be handy right here. But yeah, this is a really cool Voltron card. This thing was born to help Voltron decks, so this is another really cool card. Next up we have PortRazer. PortRazer is an extra combat card, which I love. It says, when it deals combat damage to a player, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase. It can't attack a player it's already attacked, so it can't go infinite with itself. But still, getting a second or third combat in a turn is really, really good. And especially good when you're playing Voltron decks, because if you've gotten to the point where your creature is now lethal on a player, now you can kill multiple players in a turn. So extra combats are really valuable in any sort of aggressive or Voltron deck. I don't think it's better than Mirage, which I think means it's going to be cheaper than Mirage, because extra combat spells, the good ones, haven't been reprinted nearly enough, and they're kind of expensive. So I'm hoping at least for this first year or so that this thing gets released, this card's going to be pretty cheap, and should definitely help a lot with budget builds, beside the fact that you can just like jam it into any sort of aggressive deck, and it's probably going to do good stuff for you. But anyway, I am very excited about the potential to be able to include this in some of the budget builds that I'm planning on doing. And the final card I want to look at is Coastline Marauders. It's a 3 mana with trample. It says when it attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each land defending player controls. And then it has Encore, which means you exile it and get an attacking creature with haste for each opponent you control, almost like Myriad from the graveyard, and you sacrifice them at the beginning of the end step. I think this card's interesting. So it's not the craziest card ever. It's not some insane value engine, but what it does do, it brings the damage and is oddly reminiscent of a card like Taurine Mauler or Sunscorch Regent. And what Taurine Mauler and Sunscorch Regent will do in a deck is they get huge quickly, which means that people will usually spend removal on them because they don't want to get hit by them, which means you can now keep your commander alive when you cast your commander because that's one less piece of removal that they have. I think Coastline Marauders fits into this space really well. And the fact that it has Encore means that at some point late in the game, you can get this thing back and potentially just like wipe the table. If everyone's got a million lands in play, they didn't leave up a ton of blockers, that sort of thing. So even though it's not the best card ever, I see this card being interesting, where you just play it early, someone shoots it because they don't want to lose a bunch of life, and then late in the game you get it back, and then you're just like, you guys die because you all have 12 lands in play. And this thing is huge, and oh, I'm going to give it double strike from something else. Taurine Mauler is another card that's like slightly more expensive than I want it to be when looking at budget builds, so you know, this thing should be pretty cheap. If you're trying to build something aggressive on a budget, I think this is a very good card to look at. And the term that I've coined for all of these cards is the bodyguard role. What happens is they take the bullet for your commander so that your commander gets to live when it comes into play, because no one wants to get slapped by one of these things, and I think Coastline Marauders is going to be more of that. Plus, it has the ability to come back late and do some real damage, which I think is very cool. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope you guys enjoyed this look at some of the Voltron stuff in Commander Legends. I am really excited about a lot of these cards. I cannot wait to start building with them. I believe the Magic Online release is November 19th, and the paper release is November 20th. So I'm super excited to get going with these decks. If you want to see me take a look at some of the other red and white cards from the set for different strategies other than just like Boros and Voltron, let me know in the comments below, because that's something I'm thinking about doing. But otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching. I want to thank my awesome Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. If you want to help support the channel and vote on which decks I play next, feel free to check out my Patreon, the link below.